There is no doubt that education government policies are necessary in order to address the equity challenge. And this is not a small challenge, this is a serious challenge, and we have not been responding adequately enough. We need enabling government policy. But my argument, I think, would be, and I'm presenting this as a stimulus to the conversation, that it's necessary but not sufficient. That's what this panel is about. We are saying it's necessary, not sufficient. What we do also need, both and, is innovative approaches to teaching and learning in schools that are designed to meet the needs of all young people. Equity issues, inclusion, diversity. And we're having this conversation against the backdrop of one of the biggest demands we've got globally around the movement of families and young people. Both immigration, but more recently, of course, the incredible crisis we have with refugees.
Equity, we do mean that all have access to high quality education and high quality teaching and learning. Ask ourselves what are the kinds of policies that we often think of and associate when we're addressing inequalities. And we do think of equalizing resources in some way. We do think about access, and we do think about creating new forms of provision that will meet particular needs and demands. But if we have equality in mind, then such things, very important as they are, like improving access to quality early learning, or addressing questions of free school meals, for example, or overcoming the digital divide or digital divides. Those are all very important, but they can only take you so far. These kinds of policies, when we really need to make more dynamic relationships between communities and the education system, and recognize how much learning goes on outside of schools and has to be galvanized in communities, getting communities engaged, getting away from very simplistic understandings of what a school should be to something much more collaborative and dynamic, and getting towards engaging young people in relevant learning, that all means innovation. Those essentials are all innovation. So we have to innovate right at the very heart of teaching and learning, and to do this at a sufficient scale that it starts to make a real change of culture, of educational culture.
And the main challenge as researchers was really to see how to scale up these actions, these measures. And the main trouble is about to understand what is the impact, the real impact of these measures, because there is a lack of empirical evidence that then we can use to convince policymakers you have to change your agenda. So as a researcher, we really need more measurements on the impact of these specific and single actions, innovation. Also, I want to refer to another important survey OECD is responsible for, which is the TALIS.
Elisa, you have 1 minute to do it.
Yes.
Okay.
So scaling up is a challenge, and also another challenge is what teacher says. And teacher says that 2/3 of the teachers interviewed said that their learning environment they experience is, let's say, hostile to innovation. So again, how to face that, how to change the perception. And also, what is really innovative? What's in there that is really new, and what indeed can be translated in something more large scale. And I think there is the interesting part also on innovation. What we can learn from innovation is innovative practices to see that innovation happened when there was a strategy, there was a vision. When I look at innovative practices, what I think is the most inspiring part are, and probably should require more analysis, is the type of skills, of new skills that schools could provide. Because the skills that normally are measured, assessed, probably needs to be updated. So, for example, conflict resolution, social responsibilities, trying to see what are these type of skills that can eventually be the driver for the scaling up process. So to see how we can, let's see, what's the travel, what's the trip from the meso-level innovations towards something more general and structural at national level.
It's an initiative from the minister. And I think that is why it's so special, because the aim was to be able to change pedagogical practices. That is at the core of our discussion here, innovation in pedagogy, but by a new way of governance of the system. The very important thing is that all stakeholders have been involved in 5 interconnected logics of action. All stakeholders, that means, together they first had to manage the project collaboratively. Auto-regulation and leadership, a very important part of an innovative governance, is to fill the process with information about how it is going on, what is working, what is not working, how to have information about that. And the last one, it's evaluation and feedback of all the process.
To work from the network perspective, these schools that have been working together, that have been innovating together with such a lot of efforts, not very sustainable, and sometimes I thank for the strong leadership that has made it possible, you know, this mother courage, of father courage, promoting this. And if we work all together, if we network, you can share what would it work for you, what didn't it work for you, and we can help each other. And this is the lines following which we're working.
Traditional pedagogies reproduce inequalities and they consolidate the social stratification. What happens is that we compensate that. The families and the environment offset that. And it is less visible. But the traditional school is not doing all that, generally. And I would like to say that there is no difference between a pedagogy for complex schools and the pedagogy for schools which are not in this kind of environments. There is simply a pedagogy which is not working well, but it is not visible. So there are not specific pedagogies to reduce some inequalities. The innovative pedagogies have to be mainstream. And as it has been said before, we have to reduce social inequalities. And in parallel, we need to deploy innovative pedagogies, which will be the same for everybody. To us, innovation are small or big actions which produce changes. And we want to have favorable results in the short term. Of course, alliances with families were very important. Most of these families didn't talk Catalan nor Spanish, and other families had personal and social characteristics which were quite difficult. This is something essential. We've been talking about the teachers' training and how it is important, but emotional education of children and emotional education of adults is very important, because the emotional problems in these high complexity schools is very high. The emotional stress is so strong, so we need these tools, they need these tools. So even if we have have an internal training, they also need this emotional training. This is the most important axis of our school. All the teachers have been trained. We have also trained the children with voluntary people from outside the school, and we've trained them about conflict management, because aggressions were quite important. But it is very important to see 4-year-old children breathing like that to control themselves. And now parents come to school. We can have more or less open doors in schools, and they are learning to talk instead of being aggressive. And also children are also learning to talk instead of being aggressive. So sometimes we focus on school, but we should focus on the environment of the school. We focused on what happened in the environment of the school, and we decided to get allies with the school. We wanted to have a permeable context and to be a permeable school.
If the environment is not a pleasant environment, and I don't mean by that it's not full of flowers, I'm speaking about culture, students, the possibilities they have, the future they have, they cannot see it. They cannot have the vision of the future. So the only way of having a vision of the future is to impregnate them with culture. It's what we're doing little by little. Teachers training and teaching principles may be used at all levels, kindergarten, lower secondary school, high secondary school, at the university, empowering us, having external agents to reach us by an ongoing learning process that needs to be self-regulated, in which emotions will be involved, taking into account all these emotional parts. So we're working with human beings. We intend to develop human beings. Within the education environment, we also have, this small group of rebels, and a lot of innovation has been done from the administrative side. And in the public administration, we also have the ability, if we know how to use our tools properly, to draft scholarship or to open a tender for such and such. If we can do a little bit of management and we can build frameworks to raise up our eyes for us to be able to share, to post it, or to load it on a web, for all these initiatives that could go from bottom up, to become pioneering elements, and then to make it become systemic. That is, we are using these tools. Not all the administration is gray and dark. It's a fact. Systemic is a fashionable word. We speak about systemic in the organic way, but we forget that it involves also dynamic, changing, emerging. It's precisely accelerating. It's not only finding a single solution, but rather a sustainable solution that will be able to evolve, to be agile enough as to be replicated and to be transferable.
Normally, when you want to reduce repeating, that was our purpose, the easiest thing is to forbid it. But that's the way you reform in a bureaucratic model. And I think the added value of the project was to shift from this bureaucratic model to a more professional development model. The project put really on the table the idea that to reduce repeating, it was much better to work on professional development of the teachers, their capacity of judgment, of what decision to make at any moment and with the different children, and mobilizing all the level of the system by a systemic view where the purpose is not to control if the bureaucratic goals are target, but much more, how can we sustain, how can we accompany this professional development?
But I think that the remarkable nature of the last couple of days is about a lot more than simply there being good feelings and optimism. I think of course, it's very nice when there is positive feelings, but I'm thinking what we have seen and witnessed has gone well beyond simply a sort of feel-good factor. As regards the international project, the one that we were very much in the business of discussing and helping design yesterday, we realized just how significant I think this work can be. There was quite a remarkable team that has already come together, and I feel very privileged to have worked with people that we worked with yesterday, and aware too that this isn't going to simply be a small group of experts designing the future, but really to work with cases, for example, of the work that you're doing, initiatives of change in different systems, different countries, different locations. And that's always, it's that interplay between what the international reflection can give and how that can help your reflections and vice versa, because obviously that feeds into the international work with this strong focus on innovative pedagogies.
El fet educatiu en aquesta societat del
And
coneixement
education
adquireix unes dimensions que requereixen la
for a new
definició d'un nou
pedagogical
sistema
model,
educatiu i d'un model
orienting
pedagògic nou que
learning and
orienti
teaching
els processos
processes towards
d'ensenyament
a
i aprenentatge
perspective of a
amb una
competence-based type
perspectiva de
of
formació competencial
education
i
and
un horitzó
lifelong
d'aprenentatge al llarg de la
approach,
vida. Per tant, en
and
l'educació,
to learn
la
during
innovació ens ha
all the rest of our
d'acompanyar en
lives.
aquest
So
camí
education
cap a
needs
sistemes
to
educatius de
promote
qualitat i
equity-based
d'equitat.
and high-quality-based